And we're back with John Berndt, and I'm really excited about this next topic. I think it's probably one of the pricklier ones that we can talk about because we're talking about security and the role of the marketer in that really heavy, burdensome remit. And because, as we just talked about, because the marketers are now designing experiences that touch patient data potentially or are using tools that are subject to HIPAA, the compliance burdens and the security burdens that usually are handled by IT have snuck into this area. So really curious to hear your take on this and kind of do a deep dive on the role of the marketer and how they play within security.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and there's a lot of dimensions to it. So I'm going to try to make it as simple as I can possibly do in the limited time that we have. But I think that, first of all, it's worth saying that I think for the last 15 plus years, there has been already a kind of cultural shift in a lot of healthcare institutions where marketing departments have gotten more technical and have almost been like a shadow IT department. And that has been partially because marketing departments in healthcare are usually much more than just marketing. They really own parts of patient experience and increasingly own more and more parts of patient experience. And we're also seeing a trend where sometimes the CMO is now the CMO, but also the Chief Patient Experience Officer as well. So that gives a little more gravitas to be able to try to work through all of these technical issues and platform issues and IT integration issues. But the kind of DXP suite that Optimizely is definitely is a site of a lot of security concerns in healthcare. It's been interesting. SaaS platforms were really kind of, sort of off the I'm not going to say off the reservation. Sorry. Let me start that again.
Yep.
It's interesting. DXP platforms and suites like Optimizely are a real site of security concern because they interact with the general public, because there may be aspects of them that are capturing some of this newly redefined PHI, and because hospital systems are frankly a kind of a target, for hackers and stuff.
Yep.
So I think that there's been an evolution. I mean, I think when SaaS platforms came out like 8-9 years ago, I think there was a real rejection of that because the IT departments of healthcare organizations viewed themselves as the one and only arbiters of security. But over time, I think that has really evolved as so much of digital activity has gone into the SaaS paradigm where they're subscription-based and, other parties are involved in the security. So it really has become a focus of picking, good partners, but also building the right practices in the development side and in the marketing side to make sure that you're able to sustain the security. And some of the kinds of things that people worry about are the basic hardening of content management systems, totally separate from the issue of HIPAA. This is really an issue of, can we avoid a situation where an outsider could get access to the content management system and inject something into the experience that would then fool people and get them to give up either personal information or, perhaps accumulate HIPAA protected information for a purpose like holding the hospital hostage.
Yep.
There's been a problem with that. So you need to have really secure platforms. It frankly makes some of the open source platforms really not a great pick for healthcare. And it's amazing how many people are still running some pretty insecure open source platforms in healthcare that they should probably replace with something like Optimizely. But that's one aspect of it. I think there's another aspect, which is that, as we talked about in the last episode, a lot of the experiences people want to create for consumers really come together through a fusion of multiple systems, multiple data sources, Optimizely maybe sort of like the experience layer and the orchestrator of it in the final step before the consumer, but parts of it are coming from other places, and so marketing departments really have to make sure that the systems that they're using are secure. Like, for instance, if they're taking form data, even just a like a website comment form in a hospital setting, people will put their own patient healthcare information into, a comment form, because they'll start talking about their comment, and then they'll start talking about the problem with their leg or whatever, and it'll go in a direction where you've now got a potential HIPAA violation or something like that. So there's a lot of things to think about, but I think that there definitely needs to be a premium on like a culture and training around examining where the data is flowing, and what you're allowed to do with it and what you're not, and what systems are okay to put it in and what systems are not, and so forth and so on. And I don't think there's any way around marketers having that level of sophistication when they work in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a piece of this that you touched on is all of the different systems and data sources that are inherently part of all of these experiences that these organizations are designing. And I think that's where composability really is a strong suit, but it does need to have guardrails.
Yeah.
So really, I think, want to get your take on composable does not mean anything goes.
Yeah.
It has to come with operational governance, especially in healthcare. So really want to know what that might mean at the DXP level.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, composability in DXP means that you're not dealing with a monolithic platform where you have to use all the components of the platform together, but more you're able to mix and match like Lego blocks, different functions. So you might have a content management system, a DXP, marketing automation stuff, a CDP, and they might be all from different vendors. That's the composable vision. And Opti, I would say, has always been really out in front with that, because we certainly always were encountering people who were using like Optimizely experimentation or CMP when they were maybe using a totally different CMS or vice versa. So that is an important vision. And I mean, the benefit of that, the reason that people are focused on composability is that they may have special needs and they may need to use something other than what a monolithic vendor has provided. So it's great to have that flexibility. The challenge in a high security, like either in an e-commerce, high security, financial services, or in healthcare with HIPAA, is that when you have a composable stack that is coming from different vendors and they have these different API first applications that are talking to each other, you have a couple points of failure potentially from a security standpoint. You first of all, you have to make sure that all of the elements in the composable solution are themselves HIPAA safe, and that you have the right legal architecture, BAAs or whatever, with those vendors. And then you have to make sure that any connections that have been built through microservices are similarly protected, and somebody has to own the functioning of those, the security of those, and the liability of those as well. Often it's the internal IT department, but sometimes it's other groups. So you have to you get a lot from composability, but you also have to realize that it does kind of take you into a realm where you have to look really closely at the details of everything you're doing to make sure that it all lines up and that you're not accidentally creating a big risk in your solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to kind of dovetail even further in terms of the coordination between marketing teams, IT teams, legal teams, when it comes to building up a stack that works best for these organizations, it also means that just because we are a marketer-friendly tool, it does not mean that we are gatekeeping what the process should look like from IT and legal either.
Right.
And I've heard out in the market that one of the best practices is actually designing the process where they are key stakeholders. But they are not roadblocks. They are actually the people who can help open channels for you to actually execute.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think what's tricky about that is that in a way you kind of need a certain type of partnership there, and you kind of need two roles. You need the legal expert who understands HIPAA and who understands the specific security legal risk for hospitals. And then you need people on the marketing side who can explain how the practices interact with that.
Yep.
Because what I've seen not work, and I've worked with a ton of general counsels for a ton of hospital systems and insurers, is where you go to, maybe a very good lawyer who has a limited knowledge of DXP or of marketing, and you ask them some very open-ended question like, well, what fields of data should we capture, or something like that, which clearly is not their area of expertise. So there has to be kind of a dialectic between people who understand what the data is, what it means, where it's coming from, all those kind of technical routing issues, and then legal counsel that can really understand the solution and make the right risk calls for the institution.
Yeah. And it sounds like all of that should happen proactively and not don't surprise anyone downstream.
Yeah, and it's usually not a matter of, can you look at this over the weekend? I mean, we're talking, sometimes weeks poring over things just to make sure that that there's no extra risk being, introduced. And, part of why people take HIPAA so seriously and why it's so important to look, critically at the platforms you use and the practices you use is that, it is a fairly intense set of laws, and the penalties that come from people having HIPAA breaches where they accidentally release patient information, even if it's just tracking information, are very high. So it's something to take really seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's HIPAA and security are braided together very closely, but you do have to look at them together and separately as well in terms of how you design these processes.
That's right, because even though it's good to have a CMS that has been looked at from a HIPAA safe perspective, it's really the content that you're putting in the CMS is almost always content that's going to be made public. So it's already typically not content that is representing a form of patient healthcare information. Where security comes into play for the CMS, as I mentioned before, is that some bad actor could hijack your CMS, put a form on the homepage of the CMS, and start collecting data from your patients. Things like that are pretty rare, but when they do happen, they're really bad. And that is a whole separate issue, and it means that basically you just have to pay a lot of attention to the security issues around any web platforms that you put out there.
Yep, makes perfect sense. I do want to maybe not switch gears. I think that's an unfair categorization, but one of the things that we've seen and talked about previously before we press record on today's episode, still within the realm of security and regulations, but I want to hear your take on when we talk about experience neutral and what that means and how that plays within DXP. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think, the platforms that are experience neutral are the only platforms anyone should ever look at. And the reason is that, and those are platforms where they really have abstracted things in such a way that they're not putting anything into the front end of the experience that you can't ultimately control. Like they're putting maybe the content into it, but they are allowing you to really have as finely tuned experiences with whatever structure and with whatever code base on the front end that you can have. And the reason for that is that, I think the funny thing about the web is that the vast majority of what makes the difference between good and bad experiences or good and bad production values is stuff that's happening in the front end of websites, and that is stuff that is kind of invisible until it matters, and then it's all determining. You know what I mean? So we're talking about many different dimensions, and I can never list them all, but accessibility, schema.org, SEO, performance, interaction design, responsive design, device support, browser support, security at the level of the browser, on and performance. Did I say performance? I think I did. On and on and on and on. So all of that stuff and the form factors of different devices and browsers and things that it's targeting is constantly changing, and it's not like changing all at once. It's like a whole bunch of different tectonic plates that are shifting along. If you can't keep up with all of those things and have all of your options open to do the best build that you can at the time that you're building some digital ecosystem, you're just immediately starting on the wrong foot. And so it's really important, and it's especially important, I think, in healthcare, because things like accessibility are really particularly important in healthcare, both because it's part of the mission of healthcare, the accessibility of care, but also because there's a lot of litigation, and both of those things matter. And so, to not be able to kind of go after those complicated digital problems with something that doesn't get in your way is crucial. So, I think it's also a path to meeting other kinds of regulatory requirements that healthcare websites should be paying attention to.
Yep, makes perfect sense. And I think what I'm getting to kind of tie all of this together is, along with the theme that we talked about in the last episode, is all of this shift isn't just technical, it's also cultural.
Yeah.
And it's really about building a practice around collaboration with teams, around making sure that you have the right due diligence process to picking what you want to be part of a composable suite, that you have the right folks in the room to figure out how to design those experiences and how to get ahead of some of the risks that might lie in the design phase. I think the whole undercurrent theme here really is it's just as much a cultural project or initiative as it will be a tech stack one.
Yeah, and the risks and rewards are very high on both sides. I mean, like, the better experiences really do win in the market, and bad experiences, really generate a lot of trouble for institutions. So, I mean, unfortunately, what this means is for marketers that, a lot of the kind of single button, set it and forget it type stuff that you can do on the low end is actually going to be really problematic for you. And so you need a strong professional grade platform like Optimizely that's experience neutral, that's hardened, that has done all this HIPAA safety work. Those are all the things that come together to give you the right sandbox to develop your experiences in.
Yeah, and I think I would also be remiss not to mention that partners and your SIs and the agencies that you use for strategy, implementation, maintenance, et cetera, are just as much of a third leg to that stool.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we have people who just focus on different aspects of compliance, and we have, lots of folks, particularly who focus on the accessibility aspects and things like that. And yeah, it's a huge part of our culture because people are spending capital dollars to build these things, and they have to be kind of perfect. So yeah,
makes perfect sense. Well, I think that probably concludes our thought process on, well, I don't think it could ever conclude on security.
Sure. Security is an endless path.
Yeah, this could be a whole...
You can get to a better place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to take one more break and then come back and talk about experimentation and the role that plays in designing experiences for access, trust, privacy, personalization, and all that fun stuff. So
sounds great.
We'll be back.
Yeah, let's do it.
Thanks, John.
All right, thank you.